One of the most notorious names in the British automotive industry, Lucas Industries, a major supplier of components and parts for the UK's car builders, has often been cited as instrumental as to the wider downfall of Britain's car industry during the 1970s and 80s, with its recurring instances of unreliable parts and poor workmanship being reflected in the vehicles for which Lucas products would be incorporated. However, this hadn't always been the case, as even amid the downfall of the British motor industry, Lucas remained amongst the largest and most important automotive component suppliers in the world, with a diverse portfolio that included cutting-edge aerospace development and other applications across various industries, thus allowing it to survive while the car makers it served collapsed. In 1860, Joseph Lucas, a jobless father of 6 who had made ends meet through the sale of paraffin oil from a barrow cart, established a business selling buckets, shovels and other items, which proved so successful that by 1872 he had brought aboard his 17-year-old son Harry in order to help administer the company and to oversee the creation of their dedicated facility of the Tom Bowling Lamp Works, named after a ship's lamp which was its main product during 1875. From 1880, the management of the company passed increasingly into the hands of Harry, and in that year Joseph Lucas received a patent for the King of the Road bicycle lamp, which proved to be a phenomenal commercial success and brought in a fortune, leading to the establishment of Joseph Lucas & Son during 1882, the main goal of which was to vigorously defend the patent against numerous facsimiles and to expand the product range. In 1897, Joseph Lucas & Son was incorporated as a public company and had achieved a leading position in the area of bicycle repair and maintenance, as well as the continued sale of its lamp products, with its growth from a small family firm to a major international player in its field, being reminiscent of Cadbury's, GKN and the Austin Motor Company, cementing the West Midlands as the workshop of the British Empire. The arrival of firms like Austin was a key factor in Lucas's ongoing relevance, as it was able to supply parts and components to the British motor industry from its very inception, and thereby benefit heavily from economies of scale, the company showing its commitment to its new interests in the motor industry by opening a showroom in London soon after Joseph Lucas's death in 1902, and from 1904 to 1907, sales and profits rose steadily, stimulated by the legislation of 1903 that made cars more attractive to potential customers by raising the speed limit, and it also made the components industry much busier by making lights compulsory at night. In 1914, Lucas's catalogue offered 6 kinds of complete dynamo lighting systems for cars, while during the same year, the company acquired Thomson Bennett, which specialized in magnetos, and thus extended its product range to include ignition equipment, a fortuitous purchase given the start of World War I and the unprecedented rise in demand for magnetos for aeroplanes as well as for cars and motorcycles. However, while government contracts to the armed forces was a gift to Lucas, the introduction of British summertime daylight savings in 1916 led to a permanent fall in the sale of cycle lamps, resulting in a major slump for the company immediately following the war's end in 1918, thus requiring Lucas to shift the balance of its business by introducing much cheaper versions of its cycle lamps and by negotiating with the motorcycle manufacturers to take Lucas's combined magneto dynamos rather than those made by the company's German rival of Bosch. As a result, Thomson Bennett Magnetos was renamed the Lucas Electrical Company in 1919 in order to maximize the benefits of the parent company's reputation, while in 1923, Harry Lucas went into semi-retirement as consultant director prior to his passing in 1939, the company's day-to-day management falling into the hands of his own son, Oliver Lucas, and Peter Bennett, formerly of Thomson Bennett, as joint managing directors, both of whom rapidly expanded the company's size and range. Lucas used its market position to enforce restrictive agreements with its potential rivals in the same fields, and while William Morris of Cowley was initially the company's biggest customer for their starting and lighting equipment, the management knew that, like other leaders in light engineering, Lucas's strength depended on responding flexibly to changes in the market, and were careful to maintain close relations with Morris's rivals as well. The company continued the policy of investing vigorously in acquisition rather than in research and development, with one of its biggest acquisitions being the 1925 purchase of 2 rivals in the motor accessories business, CAV, which dominated the supply of components for commercial vehicles, and Rotax, thus giving Lucas a virtual monopoly on lighting, starting and ignition equipment until after World War II, when Ford and General Motors both set up in-house component plants. After some initial suspicion, the major motor manufacturers of the day appeared to have accepted this situation, since Lucas was able to pass on to them the benefits of economies of scale, which these acquisitions permitted, while in other cases, Lucas mixed acquisition with restrictive agreements, such as their 1930 purchase of S. Smith & Sons lighting, starting and ignition operations, with the two companies drawing up lists of products each could manufacture only with the other's consent. In 1931, Lucas and its former rival Bosch of Germany set up a joint venture, creating CAV Bosch, which developed diesel engines, while signing an agreement to stay out of each other's markets for motor components, with CAV Bosch eventually passing entirely to Lucas in 1937, when the German company, probably under pressure from the Nazi government, sold its interests. In 1932, Lucas was faced with the first strike by any of its workers, when 140 objected to plans to introduce bonuses based on time and motion studies, these plans being ultimately withdrawn, only to be implemented 2 years later as the Lucas Point Plan System, with the result that the workers did 1.5 times as much work as before, for 1 1/3 times as much pay. Another agreement with a foreign company came about during the same year, when the Bendix Corporation provided the basis for what would become Lucas Aerospace, with Rotax and CAV having made Bendix starter drives for cars since before the Lucas takeover, and with Bendix leaving the motor industry during 1932 in order to expand its aviation business, it would sell 2/3 of its shares in its British brake manufacturing subsidiary to Lucas, along with licenses for Rotax to make aviation equipment, such as the inertia starter then being introduced for larger airplanes. Once again, Lucas benefited from the research spending of others, including, in this case, the American government, and as Rotax grew, it continued to rely on licenses from Bendix far more than on internal research, while Lucas was able to protect its near monopoly in the British motor components industry through an agreement with Autolite, the leading firm in the American market. From 1937 to 1940, Lucas paid Autolite $50,000 a year to stay out of Britain in exchange for keeping out of the American market, and an arrangement to supply technical information and licensees, the company thereby having cemented itself as the UK's main supplier of motor components, and was fast becoming crucial to the aviation industry as well, added to further by the rapid rearmament of the British Armed Forces during the late 1930s and the subsequent start of World War II. Even after the sale of new cars was banned and the production of commercial vehicles was restricted, orders for equipment for motor vehicles, especially the Bedford truck favoured by the Army, as well as equipment for boats, aircraft and motorcycles, made Lucas's output higher than it had ever been in peacetime, with Oliver Lucas serving on the Government Supply Council and directed design and development at the Tank Board, though it is not clear whether his involvement in the development of the jet engine during the war began as an official or as a commercial matter. In the end, it was CAV's experience in fuel injection and Lucas's electrical skills in sheet metal working that ensured that Lucas took full advantage of the opportunity and engaged in research on combustion, development of the fuel system, and manufacture of the relevant equipment for the jet. With the end of World War II in 1945, the subsequent withdrawal of government contracts left Lucas a more prosperous and diverse company than it had been 6 years earlier, with its traditional expertise in components now taken up with orders for spare parts and repair work, and complemented by the company's involvements in the jet project and the growing market for diesel engines both in Britain and abroad. Similarly, the resources committed by its Rotax subsidiary to work on the expensive and unsuccessful Brabazon airliner during the late 1940s and early 1950s was not wasted, as the technical knowledge gained from the project was applied to work on the V-bombers, starting with the Vickers Valiant in 1948. In 1951, Lucas set up a series of divisions, each based on the respective subsidiary company, with central control limited to matters of personnel and finance, under the renamed holding company Joseph Lucas Industries Limited, with its chairman, Bertram Waring, having been joint managing director with Peter Bennett from 1948 following the death of Oliver Lucas. Thus followed a decade of growth for CAV, based on the development of the first mass-produced distributor pump and of more sophisticated electrical equipment for commercial vehicles, while Rotax busied itself with the V-Bomber series, and on electrical generating equipment for tanks, and the components division focused on mechanical windshield wipers, reversing lights, and long-range driving lights which soon became standard on modern civilian cars. Therefore, the Lucas Group continued to play its strongest cards, building upon its reputation and near monopoly in the components field, and on its past record for government contracts in aviation and electricals, while at the same time, the cycle accessories business from which all these modern activities had been developed was in decline, and Joseph Lucas Cycle Accessories was closed in 1962. In 1963, a Monopolies and Mergers Commission revealed that up to 1956, Lucas and its nearest rival, Smiths Industries, had operated under a restrictive agreement which divided up the market between them, thus revealing why the most important division, Joseph Lucas Electrical, concentrated on electrical components other than instruments. The report concluded that the domination by Lucas and a few other companies of the motor components industry, whether sustained by restrictive agreements or not, was justified in order that the motor industry should continue to have reliable supplies of cheap but good quality components, though regardless, the company was soon exposed to an unfamiliar degree of competition, as the strikes that hit the components industry in the late 1960s encouraged motor manufacturers to abandon old loyalties and switch to multi-sourcing for their components needs. However, Lucas and its rivals within the British components industry were able to stay ahead of overseas competitors as long as the British motor industry itself was at the forefront of development. Examples including the fact that the British Motor Corporation, or BMC, was the first company in the world to introduce front-wheel drive, with Lucas and other components firms retaining their leading position on the basis of their familiarity with this new technology, while CAV, already the world leader in making fuel injection equipment, acquired the rival Sims company during 1968, which gave it 90% of the British fuel pump industry. Between 1967 and 1970, the group's aerospace division spent more than £20 million, £3 million of which was lent by the government's Industrial Reorganisation Corporation while making acquisitions that increased its size by 50%, but that also meant that it came to depend to a large extent on supplying Rolls-Royce's aeroplane engine business. Following the financial collapse of Rolls-Royce in February 1971, Rotax, renamed Lucas Aerospace, laid off 1/6 of its workforce, but then picked up new orders from the Ministry of Defence, becoming one of its leading contractors, with the result that nearly half of Lucas Aerospace's business was based on supplying the armed forces. The outcome of this move resulted in what was known as the Lucas Plan of 1976, where a combined committee of the company's shop stewards made several suggestions for diversifying away from military production into a variety of other fields, publishing an alternative plan for the future of their company based on the management's announcement that thousands of jobs would be cut to enable industrial restructuring in the face of technological change and international competition. Led by workers Ernie Scarborough, the Combine Secretary, Phil Asquith, Brian Salisbury, Mick Cooney, Danny Conroy, Mike Cooley, Ron Mills, Bob Dodd, John Routley and Terry Moran, they argued that state support would be better used developing socially useful products and production rather than supplying military contracts, thereby negating the need to make large swathes of the workforce redundant. To draw up the plan, shop stewards consulted their members and built on their knowledge, skills and experience, resulting in over 150 designs for alternative products, including wind turbines, hybrid cars, heat pumps and energy-efficient houses, while market analyses, economic arguments and training programs were also included, together with outlines to reorganize the workforce into teams, combining the workers' shop floor tacit knowledge with theoretical engineering from the designers. However, the plan was met with considerable hostility from the Lucas Aerospace management, and was rejected outright, with the only loss-making part of the aerospace division's business proving to be Thomson Lucas, a joint venture with the French company Thomson CSF, which was dissolved in 1988, while in 1973, the non-aerospace elements of the former Rotax subsidiary were spun off to a new company called Lucas Defence Systems. Therefore, by the mid-1970s, Lucas stood as the 54th largest British company, with Kenneth Corley appointed group chairman in 1970, but was succeeded after only 3 years by Bernard Scott, at which time Bertram Waring retired after 47 years at the company, a period which had taken Lucas from national dominance in cycle and motor accessories through to participation in worldwide changes in the motor and aerospace industries. In 1970, the group was 5 times the size it had been only 20 years before, and was thus renamed in 1974 as Lucas Industries, a rebrand that was accompanied by the introduction of a uniform corporate identity for all its subsidiaries, with the moniker of Lucas being added to each subsidiary's name, while Lucas Industries became the first group, as opposed to individual company, to advertise on British television. To offset falling orders from the home market, Lucas, along with GKN, led the way in expanding into continental Europe, beginning with investments in France, West Germany and Italy, including taking full control of Rota Diesel, leading firm in the French diesel market in 1974, while its next move was into the United States, where the manufacture of diesel-powered vehicles in the wake of the 1973 oil crisis had suddenly become more attractive. Lucas was therefore involved in markets all over the world, through its existing subsidiaries and its program of acquisitions, with 1975 seeing 1/3 of all cars made having brakes manufactured by the Lucas subsidiary Girling or its licensees, though it was the Lucas Battery Company which had the highest level of overseas manufacturing of all the Lucas companies. However, from its spectacular rise, Lucas faced a precipitous fall during the 1970s, with the company, along with GKN and Smiths, being heavily affected by the profitability crisis and foreign competition of the latter half of the decade, with profit, as a percentage of sales, running at between 6 and 9% in the period between 1975 and 1979, before falling to 2.4% in 1980. At the same time, Lucas, amid the collapse of the Lucas plan, courted fiercely poor industrial relations, with its most notable strikes being a 1971 stoppage across 9 Lucas plants in Birmingham, followed by a strike during 1972 at the Burnley factory, leading to a wage increase 167% larger than that nationally negotiated by the union officials. However, poor wage increases remained a major bone of contention among the Lucas workforce, as identified by the Shop Stewards Combined Committee, or SSCC, as with the company expanding significantly during the mid-1970s, the expectation among the workforce was that wages would rise accordingly, reflecting the prestige of Lucas on the global stage. Therefore, in the wake of the Burnley strike, and the capitulation of the management in that instance, the SSCC was able to leverage significant control over the management through the threat of strike action on par with the Burnley walkout, and therefore saw local disputes in the company often being resolved through sympathy action coordinated by the SSCC, while the management was powerless to break the newfound unity of the trade unions for fear of incurring their wrath. In August 1977, amid wider disruptions in the supply of tools to the British motor industry during what was known as the toolmakers' strike, Lucas engaged in perhaps its most damaging industrial action when, over matters of bonus payments, 1,200 Lucas component builders walked out on a 6-week strike, strangling parts for the already financially and commercially vulnerable British Leyland. Amid the stoppage of part supplies, British Leyland created a special team to scour the globe for Lucas components in order to keep its UK production lines running, with the Lucas strike eventually ending on September 12th, during which 10 of British Leyland's 36 car factories were affected, with production of the Princess, Morris Marina, Austin Maxi, MG Midget, Triumph Spitfire, Dolomite and TR7 all being brought to a halt, and resulting in 17,500 workers being laid off. Amid the various stoppages within the ranks of Lucas, component quality fell dramatically during this period, which ultimately led to the installation of faulty parts into British Leyland cars that resulted in either a significant number not leaving the factory due to defects with the Lucas-supplied components, or having faulty components not become evident until after the cars have been sold, leading to crippling warranty claims from customers. This was combined with a general lack of quality finish by British Leyland line workers at plants such as Solihull, Cowley and Longbridge, with already problematic Lucas parts being installed amid periods of heavy industrial action at these factories, and thus led to cars leaving the factory with wiring that either failed to function at all or had been incorrectly linked to different functions of the car, such as headlight flashes that sounded the horn. Regardless, while British Leyland foundered due in part to the problems at Lucas, Lucas itself continued to thrive on the global stage, with 1981 seeing Lucas Industries operate 60 separate factories in the UK, which employed the largest number of skilled electrical engineering staff in the country, while also having large manufacturing facilities in Europe, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, India, South Africa and Canada. As for battling the industrial action, management constraints during the 1970s against the trade unions were overturned during the early 1980s by the introduction of just-in-time business practices at Lucas Electrical, with initial focus on this method being placed at Factory BW3 or the Shaftesbury Lane plant in Birmingham, the just-in-time method eliminating inventory, while efforts were made to bridge gaps with union leaders and shop stewards so that this new practice could work most effectively. However, 1981 would also see Lucas face its first and only period of losses for 2 years, as caused by increasing competition and a constrained market, with the company restructuring itself by rationalizing its automotive arm, most notably with the 1987 sale of the lighting and starters and alternators business, while aerospace and industrial products were strengthened to comprise 28 and 11% of sales respectively. Under the successive chairmanships of Godfrey Mesavie and, from 1987, Tony Gill, restructuring at home and international expansions kept Lucas afloat throughout the mid-1980s, but it would suffer heavily from the contraction of the British motor industry, as British Leyland and later the Rover Group was sold off and downsized during the privatisation process under the government of Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Once the group had returned to profit in 1983, thanks to its non-automotive divisions, it was evident that the company would no longer be able to sustain itself primarily on the failing British motor industry, and thus between 1979 and 1988, a majority of UK sales for the total group turnover fell from 51% to 38%, and from 1989 onwards, the non-UK subsidiaries accounted for a greater proportion of the group's sales than did the British subsidiaries, as accompanied by the disposal of 14 units, 25 production sites, and 35,000 workers between 1985 and 1989. The restructuring of the components side of the group culminated in the 1988 creation of Lucas Automotive as the largest of the group's 3 divisions, bringing together the subsidiaries remaining after Lucas had withdrawn from the automotive lighting, starter motors and alternators, and concentrated on producing engine management and braking systems. The new division followed the trend in the components industry towards supplying complete systems rather than separate parts, designed in much closer collaboration with the car makers than had been customary, with there being an increasing degree of partnership with Japanese corporations, such as with Sumitomo on car body systems, or the Yuasa Battery Company on car batteries, as a response to the rapid rise of Japanese firms into the European market as per their expansion into the United States. Lucas Automotive's success in 1989 attracted orders from BMW and Saab Scania for fuel injection systems, thus showing that Lucas could continue to compete directly in Europe, while Lucas Aerospace was also involved in the development of the Airbus A330 and Airbus A340 jet airliners and on the EJ200 engine for the new Eurofighter Typhoon. Lucas Applied Technology, the smallest of the group's 3 divisions, included specialist subsidiaries likely to grow in response to the increasing demand for high technology, such as Lucas Industrial Systems, which produced electronic measurement and control equipment for a variety of industrial processes, or Lucas Instruments, one of the world's major designers of acoustic and vibration measurement equipment. By the 1990s, Lucas was the 9th largest automotive supplier in the world, with overall sales of £2 billion a year and just under 50,000 employees worldwide, its sales being twice those of Smiths and about 2/3 those of GKN, while exports from the UK in 1997 were almost twice those of GKN and over 3 times those of Smiths. During the same period, the firm had operations in many countries, notably the United States, France and Mexico, while domestic British sales were around only 30% of their total income, though despite this, there was a sense that the firm was fragile, with a strategic investigation concluding that there would be an integration in the automotive and aerospace industries, and that Lucas had to be among a small group of core suppliers. With Lucas lacking the resources to grow its own businesses, several joint ventures and strategic alliances were investigated, with several potential partners being highlighted, though possible merger arrangements fell through due to specific difficulties in operational or corporate compatibilities, leading to Lucas identifying Verity, a Canadian multinational manufacturing company, as a reluctant option. The Verity Corporation had its roots in Canadian tractor company Massey Ferguson, as formed through the combination of the British Ferguson Brown Company and Canadian Massey Harris Limited in 1953. Massey Ferguson having been under the leadership of Englishman Victor A. Rice, son of a chimney sweep and former Ford line worker at Dagenham, who had become chairman of the firm in 1980. Saved from bankruptcy in 1981 by a $200 million rescue package put together by the Ontario government, Rice had undertaken various controversial manoeuvres with the Massey Ferguson Company, including relocating the firm's headquarters from Toronto to Buffalo in upstate New York during 1986, which was seen with bitter resentment by the Ontario government as it reneged on part of the renegotiated loan agreement that required Massey Ferguson to retain its headquarters in Canada. During that same year, seeing the potential for entering the burgeoning market for automotive components as the international car market expanded rapidly, Rice established the Verity Corporation as a dedicated firm for this particular sector, the name Verity being based on Rice's initials of VAR, while in 1988, he disposed of Massey Ferguson and all other agricultural production companies, followed a year later by Verity's acquisition of American auto components manufacturer Kelsey Hayes through an agreed bid for the Detroit-based Feuerhoff Company at a cost of $770 million. With Verity having established itself as a major figure in the auto components sector within only a few short years, Lucas accepted a painful merger deal in June 1996, worth $2.04 billion, thus creating the world's 8th largest automotive parts supplier, with Verity shareholders gaining 38% of the new firm, which was to be called Lucas Verity plc. Despite the Lucas management holding 62% of the shares in the new Lucas Verity company, the merger resulted in several Lucas directors resigning on the day the merger was completed, when Rice was appointed CEO of the firm, with the last of the Lucas directors having left the company by the end of 1996. With all management ties to the once independent Lucas firm having departed, Rice quickly worked to remove all traces of the former Lucas company by way of moving the company's headquarters from Birmingham to Buffalo during 1998, though Rice suffered an embarrassing defeat in the shareholder vote amid claims that its directors were looking to cash in on the much higher pay brackets available in the United States, leading to him being heavily criticized by the British press. It was amid this barrage of controversy that in March 1999, Lucas Verity received an all-cash takeover offer from TRW, an American company specializing in satellites, defense and automotive parts, thus leading to the end of Lucas Verity, with Lucas Diesel Systems quickly being sold to Delphi during January 2000, which was then an American-based automotive parts and systems manufacturer with a large presence in Europe. The diesel fuel injection equipment research, engineering and manufacturing business of Lucas, known in later years as Lucas Diesel Systems Limited, remains at all of its original worldwide sites with the exception of those in Japan and South Carolina, while the company name has been changed to Delphi, and the business is a major part of its powertrain division. Lucas Aerospace, by then called TRW Aeronautical Systems, was sold to the Goodrich Company in October 2002, and remains in operation in France and the UK as part of UTC Aerospace Systems, while TRW itself was later acquired by Northrop Grumman, who sold the automotive assets of Lucas, Verity and TRW's own automotive group to the Blackstone Group as TRW Automotive. In September 2004, Elta Lighting Limited, a UK-based automotive electrical components supplier, acquired a license from TRW Automotive to use the Lucas name and logo on its products in the UK and Europe, and today trades under the name of Lucas Electrical, concentrating on aftermarket components supply rather than as an original equipment supplier to manufacturers. In summary, Lucas, at one time, proved itself to be among the largest automotive component suppliers in the world, and by far the largest in the UK, cementing its place with nearly all of Britain's biggest car builders, and seeing global influence that lasted from the early years of motoring right up until the 1980s. However, despite diversifying its portfolio into aerospace development, the automotive industry was very much Lucas's home ground when it came to sales, and with the collapse of the British motor industry during the 1970s and 80s, combined with rising competition from abroad, the firm struggled to maintain its position amid an ever-changing market, thereby putting it into the hands of Verity and eventually the pages of history.